Welcome to Demming Chronicles, where we focus on issues that are current and trending. We speak to persons who are behind the stories. Our intention is to nudge the conversation in the direction that helps us solve some of our wicked problems. We intend to change the conversation because we believe that in changing the conversation, we can change behavior. On this week's program, we welcome Tracy Hackshaw.
Hi, Denise. Thanks for having me.
And our next guest is Mark White.
Thanks for having me as well.
And on this week's program, we have two absolutely intellectuals in our country, people who have made a difference, people who continue to share their ideas to ensure that our country moves forward. Demming Chronicles. We'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back to Demming Chronicles. Tracy Hackshaw, welcome to the program, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Denise. Well, I've been involved in the digital sphere, ICT sphere, for just about 20 years now, actually. And I've been involved in the government and the private sector, and I've been, trying to drive transformation through the digital economy for some time now. I was involved first with the Fast Forward project, which you may be aware of. That was started around 2003, 2004. And since then, I've been, in the government and in the private sector trying to help our country grow and compete in the global digital economy, utilizing the technology of today. And hopefully we can, make strides beyond where we are today, and go forward.
And what is your assessment of where we are today, and why are we at that particular juncture?
Well, I think today we have a challenge because we have been, a bit stuck, if that's the word I want to use, in our drive forward. We got a good head start in the early 2000s, I would say. But since then, we've been pretty much, marking time. And some of the issues that I think are problematic are, a lack of governance in the entire transformation process, areas related to service delivery, and I mean, to be totally honest with you, a lack of focus on the digital sector as a primary driver for economic diversification and transformation. So
can you break down what you mean by governance that impedes the transformation process? What do you mean by governance?
In this particular sphere, I'm referring to here the idea of general oversight and performance measurement of what we're doing and where we're going. We've had a general lack of targets and measurement of those targets and accountability for not hitting those targets. And in terms of what we're trying to do, it's been state-driven, primarily at the state level. We haven't truly involved the private sector in the way we should, but even beyond that, we haven't involved the other actors, so civil society, the technical community, academia, end users, consumers. I think that lack of involvement has been, a negative strike on what we have been trying to do. So I think going forward, we need to make a better attempt to involve all our stakeholders in this governance discussion, so that we can all be held accountable.
That discussion sounds so familiar that we seem to be operating in silos. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on how could we break that penchant that we have to operate in silos?
Yeah, it's a hard question.
But it seems, from my observation, in every sector, it seems to be the big issue that we're talking digitalization, we're talking transformation, but we've not brought all the stakeholders to the table. Yes. So let me just switch the question. If you had a magic wand and you had a wish, what would you like to see? What's a big change you would like to see?
Well, I think I'd like to see a focus on better and more meaningful digital literacy on the one hand. To take the discussion beyond the broad thinking of social media and, talking about Facebook and WhatsApp and those kinds of things, because we have seen with the education thrust towards online learning, I think we saw a major gap in the literacy levels of our population. I'm not going to cast aspersions, but many people think the internet and technology equals social media and Facebook, but we haven't really gotten beyond that outside of a certain level of the population. So we need to take the discussion beyond that. We also need to take the discussion into government in terms of improving service utilizing technology. And by doing that, I think we would enhance all levels of this transformation process by focusing on service delivery, service excellence, and better ways to deliver those services. We can not only improve service, but also increase employment, increase innovation within our economy, and a better quality of life for all, quite literally.
You've really put on the table a range of issues that at the bottom of it, there are two things I've heard. One is literacy and the other one is service excellence. Tell me a little about literacy, because there's a view that you don't have to be too literate to use the internet.
Yeah, so literacy, I guess, comes in many guises. So, what you know and what you don't know is sort of the dichotomy. I would say that in terms of literacy at this stage, knowing how to use the technology is one aspect of it, but not just that, but knowing to use it to improve what you're doing is the other aspect of it. So not just a sort of give and take, but also using it to develop and deliver new things. So an approach, and I think the recent issue we had this week in terms of internet disruptions kind of exacerbated that thought process. The idea of local content, and I don't mean just doing funny videos online, but utilizing technology to drive what we're doing in our day-to-day jobs, in our professions, our learning, our schools, our homes. And if we look at that carefully, we would probably find ways where we would take the opportunity as individuals, as professionals, as students, as parents, whoever, and maybe find a way to, maybe I could use something to do this better. Maybe I could, deliver the skills that I have in baking, or the skills I have in craft making, or the skills that I have in doing whatever, and showcase that and earn a living from that. And again, I'm trying to avoid stating that buying and selling is what we're trying to talk about here. We don't want to take exactly what we do offline and put it online. We want to find new things that we want to show. And that literacy that you gain from learning how to do something, experiential learning, is something that I think is very important and not really well explored in this discussion on transformation.
And what about the conversation about service excellence?
Yeah, so again, a major challenge. So metrics are important. How putting a service online, whether it be a business service or a government service, is not an easy thing, but it's also not impossible. Doing that is I think the easy part, to be honest. The challenge we face with that approach of just putting things online and doing what we do offline online is not attempting to measure how well we are doing it in the first place. Our processes that we are delivering those services by us are not fixed to make it even more effective or more meaningful or more impactful. And we simply say, let's just put X online and let's add the internet to it and let's make it happen. And when you do that and deliver that service, it tends to be less than optimal. And,
Yes.
and what happens is that people don't take it up as much as they need to or want to. And then you say, well, we failed and then we have to start over. But really what you have done is not looked at the actual service that you are delivering, looking to find a better way of doing that service in the first place, and then putting the service online or digitally, delivering that service.
Right. Just to change the conversation just a little, you raised the big issue we had this week where we lost internet service for maybe 4 or 5 hours. What are some of the learnings from that?
Well, one of the major learnings, I think, is that, one on the, I guess it's both a double-edged sword, the level of dependability or reliability, well, the dependence we have, I should say, on the internet has really improved or increased over the last 2 or 3 years, certainly this year. So that's good in one way, but on the other hand, that level of dependence has not led to improved reliability or resilience, as what I would like to use, on the overall communications infrastructure. So I think what this has exacerbated is that our government, our regulator, and our ISPs, so the private sector, need to work together to find a way to reduce this dependence on effectively a single point of failure. And I know the ISPs will indicate, and I know it's true, that there's redundancy in what they're doing. But that redundancy still leads to a single source, which is connectivity at the US, right? So if you cut the line, cut fiber, which was what happened in the, which led to the whole problem in the first place, which led to the outage in Curacao, et cetera, et cetera. If you have that dependency on that single approach to connectivity, you open yourself up to a whole range of challenges. So we need to look at other routes or other passages to that connectivity. We need to look at potentially looking at satellite sources of connectivity, which have become more feasible with the low Earth orbit approaches from Starlink and OneWeb and those companies. And we also need to look at how we deliver that service to our citizens, and perhaps even find better redundancy at that level as well, so that if there's a breakage somewhere, we can rapidly route to something else. And by that I mean, again, the local content discussion comes in, so that if connectivity is based within the country and applications and data hosting is based within Trinidad and Tobago, reduce reliance generally on overseas content. And therefore, we can move forward with a local approach if something happens internationally.
And just before we bring this interview to a wrap, what do you think the man in the street should be looking at to determine whether we are optimizing our use of technology? What are some of the small indicators the man in the street should be looking for?
I think there are quite a few of these things. First of all, less vehicles on the road, less lines at the bank or at the supermarket or wherever it is. If you're seeing those things, you're getting a good idea of what's happening with technology. As I indicated before, better, more convenient access to services, massive improvements in the customer service levels, improvements in public service delivery, more sustainable economic approaches, leading to better foreign exchange, which leads to better quality of life, better flexible working relationships and arrangements, which again lead to more time at home for your family, more local content generally, so and use of that content. So if Carnival is made virtual, as might be happening this year, it shouldn't be a massive shift in thinking. It should be, well, we can do simply what we've been doing all the time and just move it to another mode. So once we see, less transformative thought processes being applied to technology, and it's more embedded in your daily life, and it's something that is not seen as being, out of the world. We're going to go online for education. Great, let's do that. Not a problem. As opposed to, oh my gosh, we have to go and get devices and tablets and get connectivity. Once you start seeing those discussions shift from, catastrophic or transformational discussions to simple shifts and thought process pivots, I think we're well on the way there to Man Street understanding what's happening. And maybe the last point on that, technology leads to better accountability and transparency and auditing of what we do on a day-to-day basis, especially at the public sector level. So to a large extent, and that discussion also has been quite prevalent, to the procurement and accountability at the public service level, we're able to better manage that and have much greater access to documents and data, and be able to make better decisions due to data trends being more available and better forecasting. So large-scale improvements in just general the ways of doing things that we do today.
Thank you very much. And what a shopping list of things that the man in the street could look for. And ultimately, it will result in better accountability and a better quality of life for citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And that's it on this segment of Demming Chronicles. We'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back to Demming Chronicles. And on this segment, we welcome Mark White. Mark, tell me, what do you do? What's your area of business?
Well, I own and run an advertising agency. That's it.
But that's not it, because owning and running an advertising agency in this time, I'm sure, is different. Tell us something about, let's say, 10 years ago, what it was like to run an advertising agency and what it is now.
Okay, well, basically there were trends that were taking place, and all COVID was, because we're going to discuss COVID. COVID was an accelerant, essentially an accelerant. So it brought things that were going to take 2 years to happen in Trinidad and Tobago to happen some months ago. And we can discuss the implications of those things. Also, what you're talking to Tracy about has heavy implications for our industry, because marketing communications are no longer simply creative ideas in the old-fashioned way that we understood them. They're also matters of engagement using technology, matters of customization using technology, matters of relevance and service using technology. And so if you look at the modern marketing department, which I don't think we have many of yet in Trinidad and Tobago, that is what they're going to be composed of, and that's what they're being composed of in other parts of the world already. And then we have a disturbing trend in our industry, which was and is the commoditization of ideas. And I'll give you an example of something very quickly. Many years ago, I was playing for my father, who is blind but a music teacher, a performance by a young girl, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with the technique. She hit all the right notes at the right time, but it was bland. And even though he's blind, he could see that it had no soul. It was an awful performance that was a perfect execution, almost like by a machine. And in the commoditization of ideas, we are losing that human depth, but we are replacing it with service improvements in services, which is good, but we are also losing the value of the idea. And one example of that is try to get somebody to read more than 3 paragraphs. People are looking for depth in a phrase, and they're not going to find it all the time.
So, Mark, your industry seems to have become more complex, because from my understanding of the advertising industry is that you were able to create an idea, create a concept, go to a client, the client will then decide on that concept, and you do the execution. In today's world, it seems that clients feel that, okay, I can take my smartphone and I can do the photography. Okay, I can use Canva and I can do some of the design. And there's something more than that. Let's talk.
I don't think it is. I think that was, but I don't think that is. I think what has happened, and a lot of it is good, is that I can use technology to track people's behavior. I can talk to them on multi-channels. So Mark could be a customer, and you're reaching him on WhatsApp, you're reaching him on Facebook, you're reaching him on IG, you're reaching him by email, you're reaching him on multi-channels, and he is going to move between these channels as a normal human being, and you're going to be reaching him on all of them, and you're going to understand his behaviors, his trends, and you're going to be able to message him appropriately and send things to him that are of interest to him. So I follow a bunch of sites on IG, a number of them are nature sites. So I get a lot of sponsored ads that deal with things that are relevant to nature, gardening things and so on. So that is really where it's going, and it's a kind of pragmatism, but it means though that people are able to drive sales using technology, and they're riding on brand equities that was established long ago. And it is interesting to see whether those brand equities will survive or how they will survive. I do think that I am very happy when I get messages that are appropriate to me. I'm quite happy to talk to a chatbot instead of some annoying human being who gives me what I want when I need it. And I feel quite well served without ever having to go to the bank, because I seldom, if ever, go. And none of this disturbs me at all. But if I'm into communications and advertising, clearly the channels and the content that I'm going to be producing is going to have to be vastly different. Very, very different.
Earlier on, you referenced the absence of soul in the music. There was a time when advertising resonated. And is it that the technology is removing that warmth and that connection from the way advertising is being presented to us in today's world?
Well, that is a very interesting question, Denise, and I'll tell you why. One of the misfortunes of contemporary culture in our country, and where we don't have economies of scale so we would not be the only market like this, is that advertising became, to a large extent, the only time we saw ourselves in mass media. You could see yourself in an ad for KFC, you could see yourself in an ad for First Citizens, but you're not going to see yourself in a movie because we didn't have a movie industry. So advertising had a very strong cultural connection. And because culture is how, okay, all human beings are basically the same and they all have universal appetites, wants, and needs, etc. But culture is a mechanism by which they approach these universal things. You know, this is what is appropriate, this is what is inappropriate, this is how you walk an edge in Trinidad, it's a different edge in the USA, it's a different edge if you're living in Russia. So culture is very, very important. And because we utilize culture as a tool of influence, we actually did create material that resonated. Now the question becomes, does material still resonate? Does it resonate in the same way? And can it resonate? And I think that the answer, of course, to all of those is potentially yes, it can. But what we are sacrificing, you remember what Walcott said, I think it was in his Nobel laureate speech? One of the advantages of growing up in a poor island, he was referring to St. Lucia, is that we could not afford too much mediocrity. Now we have massive mediocre availability.
Yes.
So I used to, at one point, I used to zoom up and down cable and watch 4 movies at the same time because they were all trite and they all were following a predictable plot. And I could actually enjoy 4 movies at the same time because they didn't require anything more from me than a mind that wanted to shut down. So the technology has created a kind of immediate, an increased amount of immediate gratification. And there are fewer and fewer people who are prepared to spend time to dig deeply.
Yeah.
So that group was always a small minority anyway, but it was because there were no competitive elements, it was still economically viable for the providers of depth to survive.
So do we have providers of depth today?
Well, you see the books, the purchase, and there was a time when book started dropping. Now book sales are up.
Back up.
But,
Mark, I
Sorry.
wanted to challenge you. I want to challenge you on a statement that you made earlier on, where you talked about we saw ourselves in advertising. There was a conversation that what we saw was the agency's interpretation of that mixed Trini, which is not the typical Trini.
In Mid-Atlantic Brown is what you're talking about.
Yes. Tell me about
No, it's a fair question, and it's awful because it was predicated on a number of assumptions which are fallacious. And one of those assumptions came out of Port of Spain, where basically, if you're basically Afrocentric and you throw to brown people, you talk to everybody in Trinidad. And there was a large ignoring of the 50, or at the time it would have been 50, or effectively 50% of the population, which is Indian. And and why that happened is because you had a predisposition among marketers, the clients, and agencies to view the world in that what is the word, that dialogue that is between the African and the European, which is much longer than the Indian and the Chinese and so on coming in. And so you did have what they used to refer to the Mid-Atlantic Brown. I remember once putting a person in an ad once. The person was very, very dark. And the client called me, I won't say which client it was, and said, Mark, do you think we can do this? Is it going to be bad for the brand? And I got on my moral high horse and I said, of course not. Of course we can do it. We should do it. But that was a moral decision. Whether it was actually good for his brand or not is another matter. Because you do have a public that interprets things in a certain way, and our job is to present that which the public wants to see. But, and I will say this, that more recently, when I was part of the White Oak launch way back in 1990 or so, when that brand was launched, and none of the people who actually were consuming that product were in the ads. It was hugely aspirational. Today, you're not going to get away with that. You have to have human aspiration, which is a deeper kind of aspiration, and not an ethnic or class aspiration. So people are more aware.
So, Mark, what advice do you have for advertisers about how they should be sharing their messages?
I think that I think that is a really good question. I don't see. Firstly, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having this set of integrated multi-channel approach. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and there's a lot that's very right with it. I think they perhaps need to understand it better. Some clients are getting there quite quickly, most are not, and I think that's due to motive. In other words, if I belong to a group that is hugely profitable, let's say I'm in the financial sector and we're making good money, why do I really want to change things that much? Because I don't have a need. A need drives everything. But what I would say is that you cannot run communications by Excel, because human beings are the center of communication.
Yes.
And you're going to get away with it for a period of time. But lo and behold, somebody enters your market and enters your space and starts saying things differently or more or better, regardless of the channel, and you could be in trouble.
Yes. So, Mark, are the rules different for the digital space as they are for the traditional space?
That's a good question. Okay, basically, traditional media, it's referred to as seen media.
Yes.
Whether it's radio, it's seen media. And that would include a lot of out of home and so on. And the digital media is far more specific in that you have analytics, you know, how many people you saw, you know, if they click through, if they clicked, how long they spent on your video, etc. And it creates a huge comfort zone for media planners and for clients, because they can look at it and say, I spent X, I got the Y people and Z people clicked through and did the thing I wanted them to do. And they can go to their bosses and justify their salaries and go home. You know, but it's not, the evidence so far is suggesting that you need a mix that includes a certain amount of traditional. But I think that traditional media is in serious threat. I have a particular major client, and they've just decided that press is a waste of time. They're categorical. You can't recommend a press ad to them. Are they right? Are they wrong? It doesn't matter. If that is their opinion, they're going to drive the reality. It's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And, you know, out of home can be very powerful. How does it work in COVID when more people are at home and less people are out? That's another question. So I would say that, you know, clients have to invest in research, and most of them don't want to do this. They don't really want to invest in research, and Trinidadians on the whole are very cagey with information. So the industry does not grow because I hold in all my cards and you hold in all your cards. So nobody knows what the deck really has. So I think that people need to be a little bit more open with information. I think that would help us a lot.
And as we bring this interview to a close, my final question: what is necessary for your industry to thrive?
Radical, rapid transformation. Clients started losing money because of COVID. Businesses were closed, budgets were cut, agencies went under massive stress. And regardless of what they do or do not tell you, everybody has survival issues right now in the industry. And as I said, COVID is an accelerant. So it did not necessarily create anything too much, but it did rob budget and send people in a direction. There was a credit union. My wife belongs to a credit union who would not do anything electronically, even though she begged them to, and now they're doing it. They're calling and saying, please do it electronically, because they had to. So the thing is, we have got to adjust, and we have got to set industry standards, and we have to have a little courage to do that, because if we don't stand together to represent a legitimate point of view, we will die as individuals. So we
dying as individuals, Mark, that is not a very positive note on which to bring this.
Let's not end it. We survive as a group because we can establish what we need to do, or we fail as disparate entities. But rapid transformation, you've got to change your whole mindset. You cannot do things the old way. You cannot be what you were. You're not going to make it.
And on that note, rapid transformation, radical action, being different from what we were, those are some of the ideas that Mark White has shared with us. And that brings to an end Demming Chronicles. We'll be back with you shortly as we bring this program to a wrap. Demming Chronicles, and that's it for this week's program. Thank you for being with us. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Demming.com. Demming Chronicles. Until next time, be safe.